You are listening to the Liminal Living Podcast, a resource of practices and perspectives for those in dark nights and deconstruction.
Now, when I was a teenager, I worked in a restaurant called Mountain Jack's. It was a really nice steakhouse, and I was a prep cook, so I prepared all the food to be cooked by the line cooks, like making the soups and the sauces, dicing vegetables up. Seasoning steaks was a big part of it too. Now, one time I was standing next to the chef, and we were working together on wrapping these seasoned steaks in some plastic wrap. And I couldn't reach the box, so I reached under the chef's arms and pulled the box wrap through, but I dragged the serrated edge used for cutting the wrap across the underside of his arm, slicing it open. And he winced in pain, and he gave me a look that was like, "Really? You just did that?" And then he held up his arm, and like blood was flowing down. And I tell you, I felt really dumb. I felt guilty. I felt stupid. I felt really sorry. Now, he went and cleaned himself up, and he forgave me. But man, every time I saw that bandaged arm, I still felt really stupid for a long time. Now, Christ reveals his wounds to the disciples today, but they rejoice. And I want to know why. Well, let's kind of reset the scene so that we know what's going on here. We're in John 20. The disciples made a journey towards Jerusalem to seize the throne. And they believe that Christ is the promised Messiah, and they've attached all their cultural religious expectations onto what that could mean. And they believe that Christ is going to clean up all the political and religious systems that are corrupt to the core, and then dole out God's judgment upon the evil Roman Empire that occupies their home. But Jesus keeps talking about he has to go and die at the hands of the very systems that they expect him to overcome and overthrow. None of it actually makes any sense to them. So Christ willingly walked into the hands of his enemy and died. That was just like 48 hours ago in this narrative. So now it's Sunday evening. The women disciples have said something about seeing Christ risen from the dead, because they're the ones who had the courage to leave the house and visit Christ's tomb. And then all the men disciples are hiding in this place with like locked doors in fear. Now, things outside have not calmed down yet from the whole weekend's turmoil. And then Jesus is just like standing there among them saying, "Peace to you." Like, really? Roman soldiers are patrolling the streets, an angry mob still hot and bothered. The religious authorities are probably still on the lookout for Jesus' followers, trying to stir things up again. And Jesus says, "Peace to you." It kind of sounds like that situation where you're like, "Hey, calm down." And then you don't calm down. It just gets you all riled up again. What kind of peace is even available in a moment like this? And then he shows off his wounds on his hands and his side where he got the spear in there. Why? Maybe it's to show them that his humanity is still here, so they know that this is the same man who hung on the cross a few days earlier. So this means that what Jesus said was true. Human evil wasn't stronger than divine love and humility. Could be that, maybe. But maybe also to that, Christ shows them their failure. See, most of these men abandoned Christ in his hour of need, just before the crucifixion. They were all like, "We're going to go and die with him," earlier in this book. But they expected to go down in this glorious battle, not walking willingly into the clutches of their enemies. And now Christ shows off his wounds. But not to make them ashamed. They rejoice when they see the wounds. And I had to ask why. They now see firsthand that their failures did not lead to the end of their Messiah and God's mission. Not only did Christ overcome their failures, but he proved that all of his teachings were true. He took all of the human evil that we could conjure up. He absorbed it all into his being, and it killed him. But he walked through death unscathed, and now stands before them alive, bearing the marks of his death for them to see. Now, the way of Christ is a non-violent love that seeks justice. And now this has been proven true and more powerful than evil in power. Now, their failures were not powerful enough to divert God's end of love and justice for the world. So this moment feels like forgiveness and redemption and hope bigger than their ability or inability to be faithful, powerful, or successful. Somehow, Christ's resurrection transcends them and yet includes them. About 20 years back, because I'm old, I went to Guatemala with a group of 25 folks to help a soccer club get set up in these communities with a mentoring program. And we built and restored some community soccer fields as well as some schools. And one of these areas was very well known for its gang activity. And one of the gang members must have seen our bus full of like 25 folks pull into the community because a call was made to the school principal asking her to pay for the protection of the gang. From what? Protection of the gang from the gang. So you have to pay the gang money to protect you from what the gang's going to do to you if you don't have their protection. It's like this circular reasoning kind of a thing. Well, this principal was a really bold woman, and she told them if they wanted the money, they can come and get it. And then she's like, bam, she hung up on them like that. Now we finished our project at the school for the day, and the gang never showed up. That was good. And we decided not to endanger the school or our lives with our ongoing presence there. We didn't take on any more projects there. Now, I've heard the gospel message given in such manner. Think about it. God wants to save you from what God will do to you if you don't ask God to save you. Like, is this good news really that awkward? Is this what it's all about? If we bring this theology down from the clouds down to earth, it becomes really absurd. Like, imagine that you owe a debt to the mafia that you didn't even know about. And then someone comes up to you and says, hey, you owe Knuckles $1 million. But I got good news. Knuckles' son, he's over here. He's willing to pay it off for you if you ask him. If not, Knuckles is going to come and break your legs. You might think, what is this? Like, is this some good cop, bad cop scheme? Well, I didn't think God was like the mafia. But hey, I guess so, or not. Now, God gives some authority to these people. If you have like mafia mind in here, like God is like the mafia, then he gives authority over the apostles. If you forgive anyone's sins, they're forgiven. If you retain them, they are retained. Like, holy cow, you now have ultimate authority in the universe to control people's post-mortem destiny. It seems like a whole lot of power to be given to a small group of folks. It seems like maybe that they could use that authority to manipulate people into getting certain benefits. Good thing that's never happened in church history before. That was close. All right, I'm being a little bit facetious, but seriously, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it feels like in this passage, if you have mafia mindset, the mafia god now has these hitmen. And these are all like common modern interpretations of this moment, but they're absolutely blind to the problems created by these perspectives. So what's really going on in this moment? If it's not mafia god with his hitmen, what if this is a call to participate in what these disciples have just experienced? The extension of forgiveness in a restorative way. So this is not the consolidation of all of heaven's power into the hands of a few, but an invitation to a way of living that allows love to flow through you back into the world. So retaining sins then is not an authority given out to throw punishments at those you perceive who are worthy of them, but it's actually a warning of stopping the flow of forgiveness in the world. So like, if you are the people of forgiveness, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? You're the people who pray, Father, forgive us our debts as we forgive those in debt to us. Like, after all, that's what just happened to the disciples. They were confronted with their greatest failure, their wounded Messiah. They abandoned their Lord, and they were extended forgiveness. And now they have the opportunity to replicate that for the world. See, after you've failed miserably, you usually have an opportunity to meet humility that gives you an ability to build your life upon the bedrock of compassion. You're then more free to extend forgiveness because you're not out for vengeance all the time. And your sense of justice can be shaped by God's desire to restore that which is broken. And then you become a conduit, not only of forgiveness, but of justice in the world. And this is certainly a far cry from the mafia god and his hitman perspective. Have you ever had a chair give way underneath you? That can be a pretty painful experience, whether to your pride or your butt, or both, I don't know. Now, when you've been able to count on a thing, and then that thing has failed you, it creates hesitancy. When you go sit in a chair, again, you might do so a little bit cautiously, perhaps even explore the condition of the next chair you go to sit in. Why? Because a sense of trust has been broken. And that sense of trust needs to be built back up before you flop down into another chair without thinking twice. And that is the nature of trust. It's earned through experience. The disciples have seen Jesus. From Mary's encounter with Christ to the 10 disciples locked away hiding in fear, encountering Christ, all of them have seen Jesus now except Thomas. He wasn't there. We don't know why he wasn't there, but he wasn't there. But when the news came to him that they all saw Christ alive, he says that he's not going to believe it until he can physically touch the wounds of Christ. Okay, I get a little bit squeamish around like people's insides being on the outside. Maybe you're the same way. I once cut off a piece of my finger while I was chopping vegetables, and the sight of a piece of my finger on the cutting board, like I just turned white as a ghost, got nauseous, and had to go sit down. So I have a harder time with this passage for that reason. Like, why would you want to touch it? This is gross to me. I'm sorry. But we have to remember that John is writing in a style that is meant to be more mystical and symbolic. He messes up the timeline of Christ's life on purpose to communicate a point. He uses language and imagery that's meant to be poetic, and he communicates details about events that have double meanings, like the topical and the spiritual. He's very, very gifted at writing in this way. So touching the wounds of Christ is meant to be read in the same manner. Christ's wounds are for the world, so they are also encompassing the world's wounds. Contained in the wounds of Christ are all the wounds of the world as well. And Thomas is a soul that has been wounded. Now, Richard Rohr sees Thomas's desire to touch the wounds of Christ as a way of seeking union with Christ in his woundedness. So he actually wrote this. He said, Thomas is not doubting the reality of the resurrection. He is simply trying to touch the wounds of a world in pain, as though to say, I will not believe in a world that is not healed. Thomas's desire to touch the wounds is not just about seeking proof of the resurrection, but about acknowledging the reality of suffering in the world. Not just physical wounds, but emotional, psychological, and spiritual ones as well. And seeking a path towards healing and transformation. Now, this is a central theme of Christian spirituality. When we acknowledge the wounds of another as being real, we can participate in the ongoing work of Christ in the world. The other disciples did not need this extra encounter like Thomas did, but Christ honors his request. He's not doubting Thomas as much as he is hesitant Thomas. You see, when we acknowledge another person's hardship and get in proximity to touch it and interact with it, we meet them as Christ met Thomas. Now, having wounds ourselves and being vulnerable about that, we can then offer them up as an act of solidarity that helps the other feel seen and not alone. Some of the most powerful words someone can hear in a moment like this is, yeah, me too. You're not alone. You are not insufficient. It's just really that hard. That space of kindness strengthens us. That's where the power of God is felt, more than muscling through anything that you could just power through. This story is an invitation to see another person's reality and honor it with a compassionate presence. And we are the ones referred to at the end. Blessed are those who believe, who don't see. One of my favorite poets, Walt Whitman, once said, "Re-examine all you have been told in church or school or in any book, and dismiss whatever insults your own soul. And then your very flesh shall be a great poem and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body. This quote encourages us to have the courage not to conform, but to remain authentic to our intellectual and inner life. This is exactly what Thomas, one of the disciples of Jesus, exemplified in the Gospel of John. He refused to hold on to ideas about God, but wanted to see the flesh and bone of God. Thomas's courage teaches us to embrace doubt as a form of faith and have the courage to speak the truth. Now, Thomas is often known as the doubting disciple, but this is a totally unfair characterization. In John 20, we see that Thomas's courage, he had to say things as they ought to be said. He expresses his doubts about Jesus' resurrection, and he refuses to believe in something just because others told him about it. He wants to experience it for himself, to see the flesh and bone of the risen Christ. This is not an act of doubt, but an act of faith. Now, here's how it is. In his book, The Way of the Heart, Thomas Merton says, faith means doubt. Faith is not the suppression of doubt, it is the overcoming of doubt. And you overcome doubt by going through it. The person of faith who has never experienced doubt is not a person of faith. You see, doubt is a form of faith, much like courage is a form of fear. Doubt is not the absence of faith, but rather the willingness to ask questions and seek answers. Thomas demonstrates this courage to doubt and to seek truth, and in doing so, he teaches us that doubt is not the opposite of faith, but rather a crucial part of it. So instead of seeing Thomas as this second-class disciple, we should look at him as the father of courageous and authentic faith. Thomas's courage to question and doubt was not only seen here, but in John 14:5, when Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to die, but also to go and prepare a place for them after he dies. Thomas speaks up and he says, hey, Lord, we don't even know where you're going. How are we going to know the way? I love Thomas's willingness to ask questions and seek understanding, even when it may be a little bit uncomfortable. And Jesus never scolded or punished Thomas for his questions, but instead met him where he was and provided what he needed to believe in his own way. So Thomas teaches us the importance of being authentic to our intellectual and inner life, even if it means questioning and doubting the things that we have been taught. You have to own them for them to be lasting. You can't just conform to what was handed to you. You see, your soul is a teacher. It already knows the truth, but a truth that can't be grasped with concepts, ideas, and propositions. Faith is a wordless kind of knowing that we grow in confidence with as we wrestle to integrate our inner and outer worlds together into a cohesive confidence and peace. So if you have doubts, and you're not sure what is true, or have gone through some kind of faith deconstruction or dark night of the soul, you're not some second-class Christian, you're just an honest human being. Thomas inspires us to have the courage to not merely hold on to the things that were handed to us, but to own them through our own wrestling with it. So be patient with yourself as your soul teaches you to find what is true.
Thank you for listening to the Liminal Living Podcast. If you're interested in spiritual direction to help you navigate through your dark night or deconstruction journey, please check out our website, www.liminalliving.org. We will see you next week. Blessings.